BayBrazil is a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2010 to connect all the professionals and techs here in Silicon Valley that are working with Brazil or investing in Brazil or working for companies doing business with Brazil. So nearly $18 billion in VC fund has been invested in payment startups in this past 9 months. One of the Brazilian stars has been Nubank. Anyone familiar here with Nubank? They just received 180 million from Tencent, and now the company is appreciated, is valued at 4 billion. So much disruption going on in Brazil in this sector. So we put together this event to discuss just that, because there are several players disrupting this market in Brazil. So we are very happy tonight to have one of the players here with us. So just to tell you a little bit about the format, we are going to have a presentation by our partners at Pinheiro Neto, and then our special guest from PagBrasil will also do a presentation, and then Vicente Silveira, the chairman of BayBrazil, will moderate a panel, and we will also welcome your questions. So welcome everybody, and I want to ask now to join me here, please. Marília de Cara, come right here, Marília. Marília is a senior associate at Pinheiro Neto, and Bruno Balducini, please join me here, Bruno. Bruno is partner at Pinheiro Neto, and I'm very proud to be working with Marília, Bruno, and our friends at Pinheiro Neto. Pinheiro Neto is the very first Brazilian firm to have a presence here in Silicon Valley. So we are working together. We started working together about 2 months ago. Who was here in our conference? A few of you were. So you met Rafael De Cunto, and now I'm pleased to present Marília and Bruno, who will help us to understand a little bit more about this industry. Obrigada, Marília and Bruno.
Thank you, everyone. Very nice being here. It's a pleasure. It's an honor. It's our first experience with you guys. So Margarese said, look, don't do boring things because people go away. So although we are lawyers and we tend to be boring, we're going to make an effort to actually make a dynamic presentation. So we're going to divide here into two. So Marília is going to start a little bit, and then we're going to show trends that we're seeing in Brazil, the regulations, how they're influencing where we're going in Brazil. So it's very dynamic and it's changing all the time. So if you want to ask questions during our presentation, if you have specific questions, go ahead, and then we're still going to have the Q&A at the end anyway. So please interrupt us. So I will let Marília talk, and if I do interrupt, there are two reasons. I'm not because I'm interrupting, just to be sure. It's because my background, being Italian descendant, I tend to overspeak. So I'll try to hold myself and let Marília speak. But if I do, you have to understand it's a genetic thing. It's not I'm interrupting. So go ahead, Marília.
All right. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Although we're lawyers, I'll try to avoid the legalese as much as possible, but I really think it's interesting for us to discuss a little bit of the legal concepts and the nuts and bolts of payment arrangements in Brazil, especially to understand how they reshaped the payment industry, and also to discuss a little bit about what the future holds in terms of opportunities and new structures and so on and so forth. So here's a little bit of our agenda. So we're basically going to cover a little bit of the payment industry in Brazil, the history and the statistics, framework of payments in Brazil nowadays, international payment facilitators. We'll touch a little bit on cross-border transfers, fintechs, and what's up and coming. So to give you a little bit of background, historically Brazil has had a very concentrated market. So just for you to have an idea, in 2007, 90% of the cards that circulated in the market were basically issued by Visa or within Visa or MasterCard. So it was a duopoly, very verticalized structure, and there were basically 4 issuers, which were banks, that were responsible for issuing the cards, and there were basically only 2 acquirers. So the central bank started to take a closer look at that industry, and then in 2012, it issued a thorough report addressing, basically covering what the payment industry looked like in Brazil, and also started to analyze its concern with high concentration, with settlement terms. Just for you to have an idea, a credit card transaction in Brazil is settled within up to 30 days. So as opposed to other countries that settle in 2 days, 5 days. So the central bank was particularly concerned what happened with this money throughout those 30 days. And also because you may have heard Brazilians are very popular for the parcelado, which are payments in installments. So basically Brazilians are addicted to parcelado. If you go to a pharmacy, like Bruno says, to buy aspirin, they ask you, would you like to divide it in 3 installments? And it's like just like 10 reais or something. So this started to call the central bank attention a lot. And what happened following these studies was the enactment of Law 12865, which basically delegated powers for the central bank to regulate payments in Brazil, regulate the payment industry, both prepaid and postpaid instrument. Prepaid being e-wallets, prepaid cards. So whenever you load funds into a card or a payment account, which we're going to explain in a bit, it's considered a prepaid instrument, and postpaid, which is the instrument you use, and then you pay for it afterwards, which are basically credit cards. So this law introduced the concept of payment arrangement, which is basically the set of rules from networks that govern the relationship between issuers, acquirers, and all other participants that take part in this scheme. And the concept of payment account. So payment account is basically where the funds are kept when you fund a card. So it's basically the concept of e-wallet. So like PayPal does. So if you have an account at PayPal, you simply load funds into this account, and then you can use these funds for future purchases. And this law affords special treatment to funds kept in payment accounts. These funds are treated as a separate asset, which in practical terms means if the issuer goes bust, these funds do not belong to them. It will flow to whichever is the party that should receive those funds. So this is really innovative and important for the market to create room for newcomers to come in, even if they're not large entities. This creates competition in the market because these funds are protected. So, René,
yeah, also the logic of the central bank, and Maria will touch a little bit on this. If you look at the Brazilian population, you have 200 and odd million people. Half of it are economic active, but half of that, so around 50 odd million people, they do not have a bank account. So when the central bank decided to look into the industry, saying, okay, what happens, typical situation, you go to your maid in Brazil, we still have that, you pay the salary, and the guy said, well, don't pay me, I don't have a bank account, because it's the bank account, the bank is going to rip me off, or all the fees, I don't like it, so give me cash. So you used to give cash, and then, okay, but if I go to the bus station, I'm going to be robbed. So what do I do? So the joke is that you think PayPal created e-money? Well, the Brazilians, come on, because they would go to a newsstand and say, look, can I upload this cash into a phone credit, my prepaid phone? So they would put, so if I'm robbed, they take my phone, but I still have the credit. So Brazilians, the central bank started to notice that a lot of deposit taking, or about 50 million people, were actually being fueled into non-financial companies. And so the central bank said, well, that's kind of risky because that could be a systemic risk in a larger scale. So when they created the payment account, the concept is we need to protect this money. That's why if PayPal, PagSeguro, Neon, which are the fintechs, they offer these payment accounts, basically they are bankruptcy remote, so that if Neon goes bust, doesn't matter, the money is protected. So the logic of the central bank is to protect the unbanked population. But actually the final result is actually creating more competition even on the banked population. So that's the interesting side of the regulation.
So, and then basically, right after the enactment of this law, the central bank started issuing several regulations that basically created competition, determined non-discriminatory treatment of participants, which in other words means we are creating mechanisms to allow newcomers in the market. So you networks that you typically accepted only banks as issuer, now you need to open and create objective criteria. And whenever a participant comes in and fulfills this criteria, you must accept it into your network.
And that's where, sorry I'm interrupting, but that's where, for example, Nubank appears. They use this regulation and they partner up with MasterCard, and they were the first non-bank entity, which is a payment institution, to issue card using technology and creating disruption in the market. So the regulation actually forced the networks, which were not used to this kind of relationship, to simply allow competition.
Right. And one additional concern was a special concern with protection of end users, who are the merchants. So basically what happened in the past, because the market was really concentrated, the acquirers will say, so you want to accept this card, you need to open a bank account at Itaú, because that's where you're going to receive the money. And then the central bank created this rule that merchants need to be free to receive the funds wherever they want, and it does not have to be a bank account. It can even be like a payment account. And also, the central banks are pushing the networks to create mechanisms to ensure that the monies will actually reach the merchants if someone goes bust along the flow of funds. So they're asking the networks, how is it going to play out? Are you going to ask for collateral? Are you going to create a fund? So the networks are still discussing how to structure that, but this is also a concern from the central bank that is currently being addressed. So just for you to have an idea what we had in the past, and this is like a snapshot of some examples of what we had now. So in the past, we basically had Visa and MasterCard and 4 large banks as issuers. And now we have like several different networks, some of them being like closed loop arrangements. We are those arrangements that work more or less like an e-wallet. And then many acquirers, and then some other e-commerce, like for instance, Mercado Pago and PagSeguro, with models that are similar to PayPal. They also have like closed loop. And then vouchers for social benefits like meal voucher, transportation. And then some other players that they take part either as payment processors or as e-wallets, or
including PagBrasil, by the way, notice on the top left. But on the acquiring side, just an example, in 4 years, nowadays we have 15 acquirers and 150 sub-acquirers. So this in a 5-year term, that's what happens. So can you imagine the disruption and how this is affecting the different business models of the acquiring business? Issuing, same thing. You start having new players that are Nubank, as an example, is causing huge disruption in the market. It's taking clients from banks. They offer a free card and very easy to onboard on your phone process, which is changing the whole market in Brazil.
Right. So here's just a basic example of a payment arrangement. This is like a credit card payment arrangement. So basically you have a user, the blue arrows indicating legal relationship or commercial relationship. So basically what happens is a user makes a purchase at a merchant, and then it pays a credit card invoice in approximately 22 days, and then issuers pays acquirers in 27. And then an entity that may come into play here is this payment facilitator, which we're going to talk about a little bit more right now. So the basic scheme is just acquirer pays the merchant in a merchant bank, so which is the financial payment institution that the merchant appoints as the entity where he wants to receive the funds. But what happens is some merchants are really small, so sometimes it's difficult for them to have access to acquirers, and then that's when payment facilitators come into play. So these are basically entities that facilitate payments, and also marketplaces very commonly also play this part as facilitators. So these guys are basically creditors of the acquirers and debtors of the merchants. They're not directly regulated by the central bank, but because there is flow of funds passing through them, what happens is the central bank told the networks that they must have a direct relationship with these guys. So in the past, the relationship was basically between acquirer and payment facilitator only. But now, payment facilitators must enter into a participation agreement so as to formalize their participation in the scheme. And depending on their transaction volume, they also need to participate in centralized settlement within the clearing settlement system that operates in Brazil. Any comments?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course.
The actual machine that reads the card is owned by the network or a facilitator? Who owns the actual machine?
It's
the acquirers.
Yeah, it's usually
the acquirers or the sub-acquirers. So it depends. So they can own the machine, or they can rent the machine, or do a van, which is using, for example, the Cielo machine, but they as an infrastructure, but they actually process. They right. So the meal vouchers in Brazil, they use the Cielo network, which is the big acquirer. But in fact, they're just piggybacking on the network, but they are responsible for settling.
So, and now we're going to talk about a little bit about cross-border transfers, because this is an example of a payment scheme for domestic transactions. But when we talk about cross-border transfers, let's say someone in Brazil wants to buy something at Macy's, so then this scheme would not work, because Brazil has historically very strict foreign exchange controls, which means that all remittances to and from Brazil need to be registered with the central bank, and also the exchange of currency needs to be done through foreign exchange transactions, and only entities authorized to operate by the central bank can conduct this type of transactions. And depending on the amounts involved, let's say if they exceed $3,000, the entity that is responsible for the foreign exchange transactions needs to verify the legal and economic grounds of the transaction, which in practical terms means if I'm remitting money abroad because, I don't know, I'm buying a house, then I'll probably need to show to the bank the purchase and sale agreement and evidencing that that remittance really has legal and economic grounds. And also with that, I will need to pay taxes. So also what the central bank did, it created a list of natures for foreign exchange transactions. So whenever you are to remit or receive funds, these funds need to be classified in accordance with this list, just to make sure you're also evidencing what is the nature of the transaction. So in 2013, thinking of these difficulties in this cross-border purchases and e-commerce, the central bank created the International Payment Facilitator, which are also non-regulated entities that are intended to facilitate acquisition of goods and services abroad. So basically what the payment facilitator does, it closes the foreign exchange transaction on its own name, but it's doing it on behalf of a client. So, but the good thing here, it only uses the nature of the transaction is just facilitation of acquisition of goods and services abroad. So it's just a single nature, but the obligation to identify customers, date, amount, and currency of the transaction remains, so that you have you can track down what was that transaction relating to. And also, because of KYC concerns, payment facilitators can only accept wire transfers, debit and credit cards. So then you can trace back where these funds are coming from. And alternatively to payment facilitators, these entities can also act through the agency structure. So basically they would be attorney in facts of the customer. So then in that case, they would close the foreign exchange transaction on behalf of the customer, in which case they are able to accept cash or boleto, which is an alternative payment method issued by banks.
What non-regulated means?
That the central bank does not regulate them. They do not need to file for an authorization to operate or anything.
So PagBrasil actually performs as well international payment facilitator role. They are not a financial entity, so they can actually allow non-financial entities to enter the market. So they concentrate all the payments they receive, and they make one big remittance. So it's very common when you're importing goods from a China web-based site or an American. Basically, you can pay locally. And Marília will show the next one. You can pay locally, and this entity will concentrate all the payments and make one big remittance according to the drawing. So.
Yeah. So basically the drawing here is pretty much the same, but what happens in practical term is this guy here, instead of going directly to an institution authorized to operate in foreign exchange and delivering reais and instructing this entity to remit the amount in foreign currency abroad, it simply performs a local transaction here, delivering reais here, and this payment facilitator will then deliver these reais to the institution, which then remits it abroad for future credit to the merchant.
And the interesting thing is that here, they can use local payments, so a credit card, a debit card, anything. So everything happens a local payment. They don't need to use the card internationally. So another point that I think in Brazil, the majority of the credit cards are not internationally used. They are very local. So they allow local users that didn't have access to the international markets to pay a local purchase, which then will deliver the cash to the payment facilitator, which in turn will send the money. So this opened up the market. So last year, just last year, $3 billion of imports, of small size imports made by payment facilitators. So just 1 year. So that's a huge market. Go ahead.
What's the settlement schedule? And doesn't FX play into it? Given that it's probably a few days and the FX rate might change, right?
Right. So what happens is that you buy on the site. Usually these sites tend to sell in reais. And so the site usually take the risk. I don't know if your clients, you want to?
I can answer.
Yeah.
I think it's the merge. I'm Ralph from PagBrasil. I will speak later, but anyway, I can answer that question. It's up to the merchant. There are two models. One model is that the merchant sells in real and assumes the risk of the currency exchange rate. And there's also another model that the merchant sells with a guaranteed exchange rate, and the international the payment facilitator guarantees then the payout. So both models exist, and for sure the guaranteed exchange rate is a bit more expensive because there is a risk that the payment facilitator takes over.
Payment to the merchant is still 30 days away, right? That is a huge risk.
The acquirers pay out after 30 days to the merchant or the payment facilitator.
So here, but the merchant, so to be sure, right? The merchant here is the international payment facilitator, right? Is not that merchant because it's a local transaction. I'm using the credit card to buy something abroad, but the settlement is to a local guy. So in reais, probably, if they do that. So and they will take, PagBrasil probably wait 30 days to receive the payment. And so either PagBrasil can ask the acquirer to anticipate that receivable. So instead of waiting 30 days, there is a common practice in Brazil to say, hey, Cielo, hey, Rede, can you please pay today? They pay with a huge discount. So how do you manage that? Because obviously they will apply.
So is it action model? They're prepaying this, right? So must be a discount, right?
Yeah, it's a discount. Yes, it's a discount. It's present value of money plus big profit, usually. And so there is an issue so some of the payment facilitators, they tend to eat the cost, but give the money faster. Others say you have to wait. So it's a question of, the business model.
I don't know if you asked the question, but the seller record and SOR pay into this one?
The seller record is actually the international payment facilitator. It's a local transaction. So much so if you buy with a credit card abroad, you pay 6.38% tax in Brazil, which is crazy. This transaction would be a local transaction, zero tax for it, because it's a local transaction. And then as you can imagine, there are a lot of conflicts between some international acquirers saying, well, hold on, aren't you breaching the network rules because you're acquiring a merchant abroad or not? So there's also big discussions about that as well. So, well.
I think it's...
So before Margarese pulls the plug, let me move quickly here. Go ahead.
Just that feature, are you going forward when someone just send money to somebody else from Brazil? Is this seen as a purchase of sorts?
So someone sending money outside of Brazil?
Like using Zoom or some of send, you send one of these.
Western Union transferee.
Because there is no really purchase, but you kind of mimic the purchase.
Right. So in these situations, again, you always need a financial institution. So Western Union, for example, to make it easier, right? Western Union actually set their own bank in Brazil because someone has to exchange the currency. Transferee, which is a fintech that does a lot of transfers for paying of universities, for example, or even sending money for maintenance. So what happens is that you always need to have someone delivering reais to a bank or a financial institution, exchanging in dollars, and then this bank will deliver these dollars to the final destination. And so when it's a one-to-one transfer, you need to do that. The payment facilitators they allow you to concentrate all the little purchases in one single place to make the remittance.
Yeah, but just to your point on the purchase, you don't really need a purchase because there is in the list from the central bank, there is a specific code for unilateral transfers.
Right.
So basically you can remit with that code.
So, and there is maintenance or payment of tuition or
donations.
I wonder how much is the level of bypassing that the cryptocurrencies are doing in this process, because there are some heavy specialized in international transfers.
Right. So the cryptocurrency, just to be clear, is not does not belong to it's not regulated, and they don't treat that in Brazil as an e-money or e-wallet. So if you are in a crypto exchange, for Brazilian purposes, it's an asset. So much so that if you buy a crypto asset today and sell tomorrow, you pay capital gains. So it's a typical of an asset. Some of these crypto exchanges, they offer the exchange facility. So say, hey, deliver the crypto asset to me here in Brazil, and then you will deliver dollars abroad to you. So they did that in the past. But as you know, the world history is a big cycle, right? 10 years ago, Brazil decided to increase a specific tax rate called IOF on the exchange of currency. It was so expensive that people started to do something they call the blue chip swap, which was very similar to what you do with the crypto, but 10 years ago, saying, you know, I want money, I need dollars abroad. Marília has dollars abroad, but I only have reais. So what I would do, I would simply say, Marília, why don't you get your dollars, because I don't know if you can deliver them to me, buy a IBM share, a blue chip, right? Buy the IBM shares. Once you buy the IBM shares, you transfer the ownership to me, and I'll deliver the reais to you. Once I do that, so I deliver reais to her, she transfers the ownership of the blue chip, I go to a stock exchange and sell it. Now I have dollars, no exchange. So that's called the blue chip swap. What happens? Central bank look at that and say, you are overcoming the regulations and punish the companies with fines close to 100%. Because there is a specific regulation saying if you try to do FX without using the banks, is an infraction. So guess 10 years later, we are at the office and we have the crypto guy saying, yeah, I found a solution. We can send the money, no tax. I say, well, take it easy. It's not that easy. Brazil is not that simple. So that's the blue chip. So they stopped doing so. And the central bank even sent a message to the market saying, by the way, if you need to exchange currencies, crypto is not the way to go. And so they left them. So people don't do that in Brazil because there are huge fines. So quickly here, where's Margarise before she comes back? No, there she is. So a little bit of the fintech market, and it's kind of mind-blowing for us because these numbers are happening during a crisis time in Brazil. So basically, Brazil is the leading country for the fintechs. Since 2014, we see a 2 or 3 digits growth on the fintech world. In Brazil, back in August 2018, we have 453 startups. In fintech? In fintech, yeah. It's crazy. Another thing that we learned, and that's from an American client, Brazilians tend to be very eager to use the technology much more than any other jurisdictions. So they leapfrog to any technology. They're not afraid of trying. So this actually creates an environment, in addition to the fact that you have more phones than people in Brazil, right? Smartphones. So people obviously are very linked to that. In 2004, we actually helped the first B2P lending structure in Brazil. It's an American company called Enova. And they wanted to create a structure whereby here in the States they do payday loans. And so they came to our office and say, hey, I want to do that in Brazil. I said, well, you can't, because if you do that, I'll have to introduce you to my criminal partner, because lending in Brazil without being a bank, you go to jail. So it really doesn't work. So we need to find a solution. So we help them to set a model, and I'll show you some models whereby they partner up with a bank and basically lending through the cell phone. And the most interesting things about the experience is that they gave $500,000 to test the loans in Brazil with a 10,000 reais average loan, 3,000 reais average loan, with a very high interest rate. By the way, it was like 12% per month rate, but again, cheaper than banks because the classes C and D, so tend to be that's a clean loan, no collateral, on the phone, using technology and algorithms, right? Credit algorithms. And the result of that is that first, my American client said the speed that these loans were disbursed and the speed that the Brazilians adopted technology was surprising to any standards around the world. So that's the amazing thing. The second amazing thing, in 2 days was someone trying to counterfeit the site, and so the two amazing things happened in Brazil: the speed of adoption of technology and the speed of trying to create a scam. So the truth is that it was. The first lending transactions through the FinTech started to happen. And the central bank took a very interest in this model because at the end of the day, this client managed to lend to the whole of Brazil using only the cell phone and was competing equally with Bradesco and Itaú branch level. So it was quite impressive that. And so the central bank started to look at that and saying, look, we understand that no major bank will come to Brazil and try to compete with Bradesco, Itaú, because these guys are good. These guys have the majority of the market, so it's too expensive to come. So maybe we should use technology to create competition in credit, in payments. So that's the idea of the central bank. And a little bit of numbers, in 2017, 386 millions were raised in globally. Half of it went just to Brazil. So the numbers, the attraction and the need to create competition in Brazil is so strong that you see this push, right? And then, as Maria has mentioned, there is considerable progress in the regulations which are now reshaping the market. So again, networks obliged to open the market. The payment accounts are something very disruptive. So basically what is happening now, you go to a client and you say, why don't you open a payment account with me? Don't open a bank account, because the payment account, there's no cost. And if I go bust, you're 100% bankruptcy remote. Whereby in a bank, you have a 250,000 reais limitation, which is our FDIC. Also, I can transfer the money easily because we use different technologies. So why don't you open a payment account? So what is happening now is a lot of people, so examples like Neon, are competing with the banks in a way and are taking clients from the banks because they're saying, well, they don't charge me anything to have that. So why do I want a bank account in a bank if I can have in a payment institution that is integrated to the payment system? So there's a huge change, and then now the banks are trying to change as well. So Bradesco created like a super light bank and opened the account. But again, it's not easy because they have legacy technology. They're not as fast as these fintech companies. So we start seeing a big disruption there. Also, these payment accounts are integrated to the payment system. So today, if you make a wire transfer, you always have bank branch, account number, and your name. And now these payment accounts, they are integrated. So I just need to put 20 numbers, which is the payment account. So a payment account works the same way as a bank account. So it's quite impressive how this is changing the market. Sorry, there was a hand up.
There is no control in the payments accounts? Like
yes.
For income tax?
Oh, yeah. Taxes and death, remember? The two things that always come, right? So, yeah. So when you start opening payment accounts, once you hit a specific thresholds, you have to apply for a license as a payment institution, as Maria mentioned. And so once you are regulated, while the money is with you, the client money, you have two options. Either left at the central bank, or you have to buy government bonds, so that if you go bust, the money is outside. There was a concrete case called Banco Neon. I don't know if you followed. Neon Payments was the fintech company. We did a joint venture with this Banco Potencial, which was a very, very small bank in Belo Horizonte. And they changed the name of the bank to Banco Neon, so people would have the experience of using the bank. The bank offered payment accounts, and all this money was inside the central bank while not being used. And the Banco Neon suffered an intervention from central bank. allegations of cooking books, parallel accounting. Central bank closed from the night to the day. 100% of the people received the money back in 2 days because it was. Now, if you keep this money in this account, they don't yield any interest, so you have to pay taxes. Now, if you get this money and invest in something, like Nu Conta, Nu Bank offers now something called Nu Conta. You leave your money in Nu Conta, which is a payment account, and if you want, you can buy a deposit. Now, in that case, once you make a deposit in the bank and you make some earnings, the bank will have to pay taxes for you because you earn. So there is taxation always.
What is the business model for these payment banks? They don't charge fee to the owners?
They don't, right.
They charge what for the network?
Well, what happens is that the payment accounts itself, they don't give any money. But in a way, they are used to attract clients. So Neon, for example, they open several payment accounts that were integrated to the payment system. So they're very useful for people to pay, but they didn't give any money. Now, how do they make money? Well, the fact is that people like so much the experience and say, I like it here. What else can I do with my money? And they say, oh, why don't you buy this asset? And they start making money on the intermediation. And then, for example, Nu Bank, now they created a little bank inside, a financeira, which is a kind of a light bank. And you can have the option, while your money is there, you can actually put the money in their financeira. And this financeira, we actually can lend money. So they're creating a zero cost of acquisition client. It's a zero cost because people want to bring the money there. It's so easy, so fast. So in a way, that's a start for making money. And then what else? You have central bank also hearing the market, having meetings with the fintech companies, hearing the complaints. So they started to stop some de facto barriers. So example, believe it or not, in Brazil, there is automatic debit. But in practice, if you ask you want to put your condo in automatic debit, no problem. If you want to put a credit fintech automatic debit, the system doesn't work, the technology, you have to go to the branch. So the fact that there is a de facto barrier on this remittance. So central banks started to create rules saying you cannot impose restrictions. You cannot increase the price for boletos. You cannot, so they started to create a lot of things. So again, the first time central bank hitting the banks, this never happened in Brazil. So central bank also realized, and there's a huge pressure in the population, why interest rates are so high, we need to push this down, what do you do to do it? The mobile, again, in Brazil, very strong presence, very easy to use. And finally, in 2016, you have the Agenda BC+, which is basically a positive statement of the central bank to simplify regulation, promote education, create competition, and basically integrate different systems to make it easier. So, and this resulted in several changes. One of them was the credit fintechs. Remember the Enova case I mentioned? So Enova wanted to lend money, but the problem is they really couldn't do it because they're not a financial institution. So the model that we created at the office was the platform, Enova, would be here, right? It would get money from clients, investors, and these investors would make a deposit in the bank. And the platform here would find, using credit algorithms, people that are willing to take the money, right? So that solves in part the problem, because this money here that is being deposited would be used to lend money, but still the bank would need additional capital requirements, because in Brazil we follow Basel rules. So the more you lend, the more capital you have. So we found an old regulation when I was a trainee, I still remember, this called active link transaction, which allows a bank to link deposit taking to the lending part. And the rule says the term of this loan transaction has to be shorter than the term you promised to pay the money back. The interest rate here has to be bigger than what you promised to pay back. And if there is a default here, you don't have to give the money back. So if you follow that, zero capital requirements, the bank becomes a pass-through. So that was the first model that we used to do the lending. And then this evolved to have a credit fund, FIDIC. Credit fund actually would give the money to the financial institution early in the morning, and this financial institution would then, through the platform, disburse the money. So this money was creating receivables which were purchased already. So the money would start with the bank, and at the end of the day would be transferred to a FIDIC. And this would happen over and over. So these two models were discussed with the central bank and the benefits of having loans all over Brazil with your cell phone. And as a result, the central bank had several meetings, and they liked it so much, they saw the competition it could cause, and so they decided to regulate these two types of new financial institutions, the SCDs and SEPs. And the models are basically a copy of that idea. And the SCD is basically you have to use your own money excuse me, to make the loans. And the SCP, you cannot use your money. You have to simply intermediate people wanting to lend money with people willing to take the money. But they created two financial institutions that are out of the usury law. And basically, there is only a capital requirements of R$1 million. So you can set a small bank for R$1 million. In addition, you can offer payment accounts. So look how disruptive this is. You can lend money, and also you can offer an e-wallet there. It's like a bank. So why would you go to a bank? So why the central bank is doing this? Because they want competition on the interest rates. More people using that, more loans granted, and especially these fintechs are going to areas where the banks are not interested. SMEs, small, medium enterprises, they don't have access to credit. 6 or 7 platforms giving credit to these guys. Classes C and D, very few credit, same thing. So what is these two models are doing is creating this huge disruption. And it's not only lending, because if I can offer a bank account, which is a payment account, I can issue a card as well, I can actually get the unbanked population to have access to the market. And now the banks are going to get nervous, and so they will need to create competition. So the logic of the regulation is pretty smart, and we start to see a lot of disruption and a lot of players coming with ideas to compete in the market. Now, what's coming up? And that's also very, very disruptive. So as you can see, we don't have a boring life at the office because it changes almost every day. So we think you know, and then if you miss one day, you're like watching Netflix. Like you miss one day, you need to go back and you go crazy. But the next step is instant payment. Something is going to be as disruptive as probably the credit fintechs. What the central bank wants to do is to allow payments 24/7, 7 times a week, 365 a day, with any kind of method. So I can go to a restaurant and I have my PayPal account, and I approach the client to approach the restaurant to pay my bill, and I simply swipe my finger or use QR code, and my money, my electronic money, will be transferred to the restaurant account in Itaú real time. So they're integrating payment accounts, bank accounts, real time, using any kind of technology. And they learned a little bit in China. They used the China model. In China, there was a concentration of 2 big players. So they are still creating a system that is absolutely agnostic. Any kind of technology can be integrated. The only thing is that the central bank will keep the financial settlement. So the central bank will ask each of the payment institutions and the banks to have reserve accounts. So the fiat money is guaranteed. And so the transactions can happen in the electronic world, and the settlement is guaranteed by the central bank because they have the cash.
In fact, we do have real-time transfers nowadays, but it basically involves you must have bank accounts, and it's not 24/7, 365. So basically, it's like working hours, business days. But as a matter of fact, in Brazil, you can wire transfer money and have the money to the other party in
between
like split
accounts,
second.
only bank accounts, not payment accounts. So this is going to be something extremely disruptive,
yeah.
And obviously a lot of the services that bank offers today will have to be reshaped. The instant pay will end up some payment methods. For example, checks. After they implement this, the check will probably disappear. Another thing that is highly used in Brazil, debit card. Debit card probably is going to be much more expensive than this new technology, so probably the debit card will end. Credit cards, they will suffer a little bit on this amount of transactions because people use credit card for everything. So if it's cheaper for me to swipe my finger, probably going to use the swiping finger mechanism than using the credit card. So this will be a huge reshape in business, in the payment business in Brazil. And therefore, we don't know exactly where we're going to land, but absolutely you guys that are going to the payment market, you should keep an eye. The other two comments is open banking. Now the central bank started to discuss with the market how open banking will happen, how APIs can access the banking accounts, how can they offer alternative methods. Again, banks are very nervous. And the interesting thing is that the central bank has taken an approach is what the market wants, and then it tells the banks how it's going to be. It's different than 10 years ago, whereby they would ask the banks what they think. So as you can see, central bank changed the mindset. And finally, cryptocurrency and crypto asset exchanges, not regulated in Brazil. It's not electronic money. However, you cannot do an ICO that is equal to an IPO. You can do a token utility, that happens, no problem. You can offer crypto assets. You cannot do exchange. So it is a kind of liberal market, but at the same time similar to the US in all the limitations. So basically, in a nutshell, these are the changes. Very active change. This is our office, by the way, in São Paulo. The active changes. So go ahead.
Yes, so in commerce, data is very important, and there's a lot of value. Europe has regulated the GDPR.
Yep.
California is starting, doing similar things. What about Brazil?
So Brazilian payment model is a copy of the European model. And Brazil, the general law of protection of data is a copy of GDPR. So we're not very creative. We copy a lot Europe. And so the models that you see in Europe are being replicated with some changes for Brazil. So we have this new law for data protection, which starts in February 2020, and has the same concept that the European regulation. Better approval. You need to have a specific approval. You're going to have a regulatory specific purpose. A regulatory agency, they're going to regulate that. So there's also a lot of changes there as well.
You have also to have people in the country, because that's one of the rules.
Yes, you have to. You can actually use data outside of Brazil, but there's only specific situations. So you have to have people in the country as well. So it's very, very similar to GDPR. Very similar.
For the payment account are there any thresholds? And what about the networks? How are the networks countering that? Because it's huge impact.
So there's no limit to transfer money. There's only a limit to onboard a client. Different than a bank account that you need a lot of documents. If it's a payment account up to 5,000 reais, you need your name and taxpayer number, remotely verified. You don't need to send documents. Over that, you just need to add phone number, address, and name of your mother or something like that. So, and the networks, I think they're concerned. They are looking at the market. The instant pay can affect them a lot. So they are trying to understand the market.
But are they like countering with rewards? Are there proven tried methods that other countries are using at the time? Like rewards and stuff like that?
Rewards?
Yeah, rewards are not regulated.
Yeah, they are not regulatory rewards. They're trying to do alternative methods. But the truth is that the market is reshaping so fast, and there's such, and the truth is that there are a lot of margin on the regular payment. So they have to rethink how they operate in Brazil. Otherwise, they're going to be eaten up by the new technology. So these guys are very concerned. They're following very closely the instant pay. They're actually very close to central bank, trying to understand. And interesting to see in Brazil is that because you have the networks very concerned, because it may affect their business, at the same time you have the bank saying, well, maybe we should create our own payment system, right? Because they're the banks, and now you have the fintech saying, we don't want the networks, we don't want the banks, we want to do our own system as well. So there's everyone trying to create their own competition, right? So
last question, is it cheaper in terms of cost to do payment accounts? Interchange rate is there one, and is it cheaper?
So since today we still don't have a total integration of payment accounts to a payment account. So if Nubank, for example, if I have a account at Nubank, a payment account at Nubank, and you have a payment account at Nubank, I can transfer money a few seconds, no cost, because it's a book transfer. Now, if I need to use a payment account at Nubank to a bank account at Itaú, then obviously there will have to be a wire transfer, and then there will be a cost. That's why the P2P will solve this issue. Well, that's it, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. That was great. And they're going to be back for more questions. Now, Raf German, co-founder and CEO and co-CEO of PagBrasil for the first time here with us. I'm very curious to hear about their journey, the both co-founders as entrepreneurs, their journey, as well as the technology. Thank you, Raf.
Thank you, Margarese. Can you change the presentation?
Oh, yes.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming, first of all. I think some of the people came from far away. It's great to see so many people here. And it's an honor to speak in front of all of you. My name is Ralph Germer, as Margarete said. I'm from PagBrasil, and we are a payment service provider, a Brazilian payment service provider. And we process payment on a domestic level, as explained by Pinheiro Neto. And we also process cross-border payments, so we do both. We do cross-border and domestic payments, and we have a very broad set of services. Today I also want to speak, let me see how this works. Oh, yeah, okay. Today I also want to speak about Brazil, but a bit more from a commercial and market perspective. Yeah, what do people think of when they hear Brazil? It's beaches, carnival, soccer. That's normally what people think of. By the way, who here in the room has lived in Brazil in some time of its life? Oh, many people. And who has been to Brazil already? Ah, not bad. And who knows what boleto bancário is? I see there's a lot of knowledge about Brazil and the payment market here in the room. Brazil is not only beaches, carnival, and soccer. Brazil is a big market, and I know that here in the room there are some people from the gaming industry, from the social media industry, from other areas, and for many of these companies, Brazil is the 5th biggest market in the world, the 3rd biggest market in the world, or even the 2nd biggest market in the world. And Brazil is a big economy. Brazil today, with 209 million inhabitants, is the 5th largest country in the world in terms of area and population. The economy is today the 9th biggest economy. It has already been the 7th biggest economy in the world, but because of a recession in Brazil and also devaluation of the currency, the Brazilian real, it's now at the 9th position, but it will get up again. I think it will get up soon again to the 7th position. Also, Portuguese is the language spoken in Brazil, is the 5th language spoken on the internet in terms of number of users. And Brazil has 150 million internet users and about 130 million Facebook users. For Facebook, Brazil is the 3rd biggest country in the world after India and the United States. And another question, Brazil is in terms of geographic size is also very big. Does anybody know the distance on roads from New York to San Francisco? Anybody? Any guess? 3,000. It's a very good guess. It's 2,900 miles on roads. And let's compare Brazil. If you go here, in this area is a big city called Recife, and if you go from there to the west coast, at the west border of Brazil, what do you think? It's more. It's 3,300 miles. And also, in total, Brazil, in geographic size, is bigger than the United States. But I can tell you one thing. The roads from Recife to the border are not the same as the United States. And that's important to take into account because if you do e-commerce, you want to deliver stuff around the country, and it's sometimes not as easy as in other countries. Oops, the wrong direction. It always wants to go back to the beaches. E-commerce grows. Brazil was in a recession over the last year, a severe recession, but still e-commerce continued to grow every year. And what we see now is that this growth is accelerating again. And for this year, the growth is predicted to be 12%. So now I want to talk about particularities in the payment industry in Brazil, in the payment business in Brazil for online payments, and repeating a bit what in the great presentation from Pinheiro Neto. before 2006 or 2007, there were only two acquirers in Brazil. One was VisaNet, they practically represented and owned Visa in Brazil, and the other one was Redecard, they owned and represented MasterCard in Brazil, and they completely controlled that business. And then the central bank wanted to see more competition in the country, and they said, hey, the payment schemes should be open to any acquirer. And then the first thing that happened is, yeah, MasterCard, Cielo started to also acquire MasterCard, and Rede started to acquire Visa. But it's still only two acquirers in the market. But since then, since 2007, yeah, many other acquirers came to the market, about 15 at the moment. Some of them are here on this slide. But Cielo and Rede still own a majority of that market. But the others are growing in share, and the competition is growing. Brazil continues being one of the most expensive acquiring markets in the world. The interchange fees are extremely expensive, and it is for merchant and for us as a payment facilitator really expensive to do that business. On top of this, we have this 30 days delay in payout of the payments processed. But we don't do only credit cards in Brazil. We also have boleto bancários in Brazil. Most of you know what that is. It's a payment slip which is generated, and then you can pay it online. You can pay it at the ATM. You can pay it in your online bank, in your mobile banking app. You can pay it in any bank agencies. You can even pay it in a lottery store, in a supermarket, at a post office. So anybody can pay it in cash everywhere, anywhere. And that's why boleto is so popular. It gives people who don't have a bank account, or teenagers who want to play something in their game, the possibility to pay something in cash and get this credit somehow credited to the online world. And then there are some other transaction payment methods. I don't want to go into detail now. But the important thing here is that alternative payment methods account for 43% of all online payments done in Brazil. And that's huge. That's a lot. But what I always say is, in Brazil, even credit cards are alternative payment methods, because it's not the same as what we have in Europe or the United States. We have local labels like Elo and Hypercard, which are issued and owned by the biggest banks in Brazil. And if you go to one of the biggest banks in Brazil, to Bradesco, for example, what first happens is that they will give you an Elo card, and then later, they will. You have to request a Visa card or a MasterCard.
With no fee.
With no fee, yes.
If you want a Visa.
Exactly, with no fee, and then if you want a Visa, you have to pay. And so they really incentivize their own labels. And then you have things, I don't know what Neto already explained. Now you have the installments, which is very important to Brazil. So for example, if you buy a flight ticket in Brazil, an airline ticket in Brazil, it's not like here. You first pay and then you fly. In Brazil, it's the other way around. You first fly and then you pay over the next, I don't know how many months. About 75% of all online transactions are done with installments. Another important point is that about 70% of all credit cards issued in Brazil, even Visa and MasterCard, are not enabled for cross-border transactions. So if I would take my Brazilian credit card and pay for a beer here at the bar, my card the payment would be declined and my card would be blocked on top of it. So it's not any merchant, any company selling into Brazil needs domestic processing, otherwise it will not have the return on investment for the marketing activities. So what we typically see is when merchants start to go into Brazilian market, start selling with international acquiring, they see something like 20–30% of success rate, or most of the payments are declined. And then when they switch to our solution, they see something between 80–90% of success rate for credit card payments. And on top of that, they start to use the alternative payment methods, such as boleto bancário, online banking transfer, and others. And typically, for a merchant, they double their business in Brazil, or triple us sometimes their revenue in Brazil, just by adding domestic payment methods. So it's crucial and to success. Anything missing? I have credit cards, some alternative payment method. That's it. Yeah, there is missing something very, very important. In Brazil, the so-called social groups, A and B, are more or less 50 million people. These people have an income which is comparable to developed countries. These people in the past had a computer at home. They could afford buying a computer. They could afford having an internet service subscription at home. And they were doing e-commerce. And then there were another 150 million that didn't participate in this. As it was mentioned before, we have 55 million unbanked people in Brazil, and there's a very big group of people that don't have credit cards. Even in this area of the social groups A and B, there are many people that don't have a credit card, because we have many over-indebted Brazilians, and they don't have a credit card anymore. And all these people, they cannot participate in many of the services and offered on the internet, and they cannot participate in any kind of e-commerce transaction. And that's why alternative payment methods are needed and very important. I'll give you some more stats on mobile. 92% of all Brazilian households have a smartphone. 60% of internet connections go primarily through mobile phones. And today, 32% of all internet e-commerce transactions are mobile commerce transactions. And it's predicted that we in 2022 will have about more than 100 million online shoppers in Brazil. So mobile has completely changed the situation in Brazil, because before that was e-commerce through the computer, and now there are many people, and these people, they want to participate. These people, they want to flirt on Tinder. These people, they want to get online education through the internet. These people even want to buy stuff from China and import it into Brazil. And that's why we need payment solutions for mobile devices, and the solutions which are in place today are not good enough. So what are the developments? What is going to come? We have developed one product, it's called Boleto Flash. It is something in between the old Boleto and credit card payments in terms of usability. It is a Boleto that confirms the payment on the same day. Usually Boleto payments are confirmed only on the next business day or in 2 or 3 business days after the payment was actually done. And this is very, very inconvenient. Now just imagine a teenager that wants to play a game and they don't want to wait until the next day to continue playing the game. They want to play now. Even buying physical goods on the internet, it is necessary. The people want to get the product delivered fast, and 1 day lost is a lot, or maybe even 2 days lost. That's why we developed technology that allows us to confirm a Boleto payment on the same day within a maximum of 2 hours. And the Boleto is also completely responsive and allows a payment of the Boleto on the mobile phone. We made some research and found out that 90% of the people that generate a Boleto on the mobile phone print it out before they pay it. And if they fail printing it out because they don't have a printer, or the ink is run out, what usually happens, no? I think everybody confirms here. Everybody has the same problem. Then you can't print it out and you can't pay it because, and you give up on your purchase because you couldn't print it out. And this is something what we are working on. We have already developed a technology with Boleto Flash. You can easily pay a Boleto on a mobile phone in a mobile banking app. It's a thing of less than 10 to 20 seconds. And what we are doing now is educating the population of changing their habit of printing a Boleto, but doing the payment directly on the mobile device within a few seconds. So this is one initiative on our side. But we're also working on a second solution, on a solution where this thing of Boleto doesn't exist anymore. We are creating a payment method which will work like that. The user wants to buy something, selects that payment method, and receives a code by SMS on his mobile phone. And then he can go to a bank or to a lottery agency, and he just has to inform his fiscal number and this code, which we sent him on his mobile phone. And the agent at the bank, for example, can find the transaction in their system. He does the payment in cash, and the transaction is confirmed electronically to us and from us to the merchant. And this will enable that any Brazilian, without any paper and the boleto thing in the middle, can generate an online transaction, an e-commerce transaction, and pay it in cash anywhere in Brazil. And we believe there's a lot of demand for something like that. Then, yeah, mobile payment methods. There are mobile payment methods. There are many companies and people and banks and smaller and bigger organizations that tried out to create the mobile payment method or the mobile payment app in Brazil. But nothing was really successful. Nothing is somehow became predominant. It doesn't exist yet in Brazil. Yes, a question?
So what do you think of the model of Alipay and WeChat Pay in Brazil?
Yeah, it's a fantastic model in China, but in Brazil it doesn't exist. And there's nothing similar in Brazil, but it would be great if there was something like that in the market, but today nothing like that exists.
What is that? Sorry, I didn't get the question.
The question was if what I think how Alipay or WeChat Pay, if that would be a good solution for the Brazilian market, and I think so, yes, but it's not something what exists in the market today. Another thing, Pinheiro Neto already spoke, Bruno and Marília already spoke about P2P transfers. We also see a future in that. There are also initiatives in Europe for the same thing, instant payments, and these payments will work in a way. There are many. The central bank is working on it, but also there are private companies, networks that are working on it. And their ideas like, you go into a store, you pay cash into the system, you get it credited to somehow to your wallet, and you send it to somebody else. And this other person then can cash out at an ATM without a card, just from his mobile phone, or cash out also in some kind of store. We also believe that this will be a game changer, also in terms of cost, because today, as I said before, credit cards is the most important payment method in Brazil in online payments, but it's very, very expensive. And a bit competition, more efficient payment methods will really are really needed in the market. And then there's one last thing what we also believe in is a future, and this is less for unbanked people, it's more for B2B transactions, but also for transactions for consumers that are banked, that they have a bank account, and that is bank transfers, normal bank transfers for e-commerce transactions. But the problem with that is, you go to an online store and imagine a person wants to buy a pair of shoes and selects a pair of blue shoes. And then it's like, creates an order for the blue shoes, creates a boleto creates an order for that transaction. And then later thinks, no, I don't want the blue shoes, I want red shoes. And then the person generates a second transaction. And then it does a bank transfer. With the name is identified, the person is identified, for example, with this fiscal number, and then you get money. And but you have two orders in your system, for blue shoes and for red shoes. Which are the shoes you have to send out now? You don't know. And for that, a solution would be, or is, virtual account numbers. It would work like that, or it will work like that, that for each transaction, a bank account number is created, which will be only used at one time for this transfer. And with that, we will be able to identify the transfer and connect it directly to one order, to one specific order, because this bank account is only created for one transaction at a time. And yeah, we believe there, in general, or concluding that there are there's a lot of things are happening in the Brazilian market, and it's a huge opportunity, and we will see a lot of innovation and new payment method and new solutions in the market over the next years, and we as PagBrasil, as a payment facilitator, want to play an important role in this area. I now realize that I forgot one slide. But I still want to say, yeah. Question.
Perhaps you are going to, perhaps after the last slide, but I anticipated. So when you say there are plenty of opportunities and you have been experiencing one of them, what do you think are really the opportunities? Is it creating the effort, the method, or actually creating a bank or a payment account holder? What's the level that you should be playing, right? Because you could be playing only on the electronic side that the user uses and see, but it can also be on the back side where you have the payment and the connection with the bank and everything, or you have to do everything. What is the opportunity that you think?
I think there are opportunities on all levels, in all areas. Our main area is processing payments for e-commerce, online payments for e-commerce, and we are working on creating solutions that include all parts of the society.
You do control the accounts, or you just push the money from the user to some account the user has in a bank? What you found in this system?
Today, we the second option, we transfer money from an account to somewhere else. We are not. No, we don't have the account. Yeah, today. Right. Thanks. One more question.
What does PagBrasil mean in Portuguese? Why is it spelled with an S instead of Z?
It's a very good question. Brazil in Portuguese it is spelled with S. And that's why it's with S. And PAG stands for pagar, and pagar is pay in Portuguese, and that's why it's PagBrasil.
It's also the same word. From where I come from India, it's the exact same word. Okay. Pagar means your salary.
Oh, really?
What's the same name in India?
Pagar.
Pagar. I see.
My mother tongue, the language I speak, that word is exactly means salary.
I didn't know that.
Actually, this is interesting tidbit I heard from. It might be just because I don't know if the Portuguese navigators, as they went through Africa, India, and all the way to Japan, between 1500 and 1540, they end up contacting several of these civilizations, and they introduced several new words. And apparently, in Ghana, the name for shoes is sapato, which is the word for shoes in Portuguese.
We have a Ghanaian here in the room, so
Portuguese is the official language.
Yes, I know.
And Sri Lanka had it had 60 years of Portuguese domain. So they have several words in Portuguese.
Yeah, we see. But you see that Portuguese is really an important language around the globe. Let me just come back to Brazil, my last slide, and then we will open the panel here to the so that everybody can ask some more questions. Just a quick best practice for the go-to-market for merchants and companies that want to go into the Brazilian market. Brazil is a very complex country in terms of fiscal compliance, in terms of even the whole payment system. There's a lot of complexity in all the areas. And what I strongly recommend is when a merchant wants to go into the Brazilian market, whenever it is possible, to start selling cross-border into the country. And learn selling cross-border into the country. And because if you do indirect investment in Brazil and open a company or buy a company, this learning phase will be very expensive. And for this first phase, you can then engage with local partners. You need a payment service provider locally, you may a marketing company, a logistics service provider, and you learn in the market. And once you have developed your business, you have a stable business, then you go local with a local operation, or you acquire a company and go really local. The good news here is that PagBrasil can really serve across all these three steps. We serve cross-border payments, but we also process payments locally. We are also a payment gateway that only technically process the payments, and the merchant can directly contract the acquirer. So we do it all, and customers, we have customers that did that, and they never needed to change the integration. It once integrated with us and always stayed with us through all these phases. Good, now I'm really done. I have no more slides.
Thank you. Ralph. Thank you. All right. All right. Well, please stay. And I want to invite then now all our guest speakers and also Alex Hoffman, which is a co-founder and co-CEO of PagBrasil, and Beck, Marilia, and Bruno. And I think Vicente Silveira is right here. Vicente is the chairman of BayBrazil. He will moderate the panel. Obrigada.
Yeah, I think this was a fantastic panel. Thank you to the speakers. I think one of the things that I like about it is that when I look at Brazil and people look at like Silicon Valley, for example, as a place for innovation, but I feel like the reason innovation happens here is because there's a lot of the ingredients that you need in order to get a company going fast already in place. And I feel like that this is happening in Brazil now, especially in the fintech sector, and also with, of course, legal partners that can actually help companies do that. So I kind of wanted to maybe start with you, Ralph, and actually on my way here, I don't know if you guys saw like an Oktoberfest that's happening kind of right next to the event. Turns out, Ralph, I think you're from Germany, right? So how does a German goes to Brazil and then kind of like partners and found a company there? How did that happen?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, to be honest, when I saw this Oktoberfest thing here, I was tempted to go into the beer garden and have beers instead. Okay, but people went with me and pushed me into this room here. Yeah, your question was regarding how we started, and it was curious because I had a different business, which was a business that marketed software in all Portuguese and Spanish-speaking countries. And in that business, I had a problem that I couldn't really sell into Brazil because I needed local domestic payment methods. And then I thought, I looked for solutions, and there were no solutions in the market by then, by 2007, 2008. And then I thought, hey, if there's no solution in the market and I have to create a solution, I will just do it. And it was a bit naive. Now I know that it's really complex. I will have never been able to do that in the way I imagined I could do it. And then in 2009, I was in São Paulo on a business trip, and for maybe 2 weeks or so, and then I had 2 days left. All my business meetings were done, and I asked what I do now. And then I knew Alex because we did some business. It was a very, very, very tiny business. We did some business together, and I thought, hey, I'm in São Paulo now. They have very good meat in the south of Brazil. Let's travel. I asked my friend, let's travel to Porto Alegre, visit Alex. The business we had together wouldn't justify the trip, but there was the meat as well. So we flew down to Porto Alegre, and we met at a meeting with Alex and his company, and I was totally fascinated how Alex had organized his business. Everything was automated, everything was very efficiently organized, and then during that meeting, as he had developed his own gateway processing payments for selling software in Brazil, I asked him, hey, did you ever think about creating a payment gateway for cross-border transactions? And Alex said, no, my business is selling software, I don't want to do that. And I said, okay, it's a pity because it would be a perfect fit. And then, we continued discussing. We had this, at the end, we went together having this churrascaria, this steakhouse dinner, and then Alex showed us around, showed us the center of Porto Alegre that night. It was fantastic. And then we went back to São Paulo, and I went back to Europe, and nothing happened. And then, 3 months later, Alex calls me, hey, Ralph, do you still want to do this payment thing? And I said, yes, absolutely. And then at this moment we started. We worked day and night during a long period of time and made it happen. And this is how PagBrasil was born.
Fascinating. That's great background for this. I think maybe, and I have a few questions, then I'll turn to the audience, as I see you guys have definitely lots of questions. And maybe this is, maybe starting with Pinheiro, Neto, and then maybe going on to you guys. What do you guys think are the main challenges for a company that's starting to try to sell into the Brazilian market, coming from the outside? What do you think are the main hurdles?
Well, I think Ralph said one of the main complications in Brazil is understanding the taxing system. And so there was an ad in the past who live in Brazil saying, never leave your home with the American Express. We have a saying, never leave your home with your tax partner. So we have a tax partner from Pinheiro Neto down there, because you can't navigate without understanding. So it's a very complex.
Right in the back.
So it's so I think the first challenge is understanding the taxing system, because even if your common sense tells you this business model works well, when you add the tax part, sometimes it doesn't make any sense. So it's so that's the first part. The second is, although Brazilians are very pleasant people, we hug each other, give kisses, they're very litigious. So when you have a business which is consumer related, the amount of litigation you have is huge. The amount of tax litigation you have is huge. So again, that's the challenging thing. On the other hand, the spreads tend to be super wide. And the opportunities as well are very open. And finally, as you've seen, the regulators, they want to create more competition. So all of that, so that the challenge is understanding the market. Once you get it, it's very difficult to see companies that had a bad experience on the business itself. So I would say, in a summary.
Yeah, let me just add one thing to that. It's very difficult to do business in Brazil and to enter in the Brazilian market and understand it. But once you are in, and once you have understood how to do it, you usually have a very profitable business. Also because as it's so difficult, not everybody moves into the country.
Yeah, I think it's funny you mentioned the tax system. I was when I was kind of preparing for this, I saw there's a picture of a lawyer on the internet with a Brazilian lawyer with a book that he printed that's taller than he is, and of all the kind of like the tax code, and cost like $250,000 to print. And he said 30% of that was taxes. So you have that. And yeah, so I think maybe I can ask one more question, then we can kind of do around with the audience as well. So and maybe going back to PagBrasil. So you guys are open a branch in Asia as well recently?
Yes, it's true. We have opened a company in Singapore for two reasons. We want to be closer to our Asian clients. Now we have many merchants all over Asia Pacific and also especially China. And Singapore we thought was a good hub because it's also English speaking, and then so for opening an entity there it's a bit easier for us. And they are also open for fintech companies, and this was the second reason why we wanted to be in Singapore. So we set up an entity there, and we will be using it as a sales office or sales company in that region, but also for transactions.
All right. Do you want to turn to the audience? There's a gentleman over there.
So you paint a fairly rosy picture of payment accounts. But I'm curious, when you look at banks versus payment accounts, what are limitations of payment accounts that might give banks a competitive advantage? Like what can't one do with a payment account that is a advantage?
Well, I have to go one step back to understand the rule, right? So the central bank created this concept that if you want to become a payment institution to offer payment accounts, basically the central bank says, I don't want to regulate you from the start. So I'll give you a leeway. So the rule says, once you're offering payment accounts up to specific thresholds, which are 500 million reais, 50 million reais in deposit in the last 12 months, you can operate without any regulation. And once you hit the threshold, then you have to apply for a license. So if you're looking at the fintech companies that are offering this payment accounts below the threshold, they have a big disadvantage that they are not necessarily integrated in the payment system. So they need to hire the services of a bank. So in a way, they will always be dependent on a bank from a business model perspective, and the bank will impose a cost to transfer the money, right? On the other hand, the onboarding is extremely easy and it can be done 100% digitally, whereby banks, they can do that as well, but the requirements are huge. So you have these two things. Once you hit the threshold and you apply for a license and then you become regulated, payment institutions can apply for something else called liquidation accounts, which is an account that a bank has in the payment system which allows real-time transfer. So then if you do that jump, and there are investments in systems, connectivity and stuff like that, then actually you compete with the bank equally, and in fact you are better than a bank account. While the disadvantage is that a bank, once it has a deposit, it can use that money to lend money to its business. A payment account, because it's a bankruptcy remote asset, it cannot do that. So from a business model, I can use that money to leverage my business, but I can use that money to attract other business. So look at Nubank. Nubank started with a credit card, which no fees. Did they make any money there? None. However, they got 5 million clients in 1.5 years and 50 million people waiting to get the card. Did they make any money? Zero. So why did they do that? Well, they did that because after a while they say, why don't we offer a payment account? Because now this guy has a credit card and actually can pre-fund these accounts to pay the credit card. Still, do they make money? Nope. So how do they make money? Well, now they're going to make money because they created a little bank, and the bank will do the revolving, and the interest rates from the revolving will finance the whole business. In addition, now they have a bank, the payment account. People can actually take the money from the payment account and buy a deposit into this bank, and that's they have the funding. So in a way, the payment account has to be seen as a very convenient way to bring the client to the system, but using all the regulations, you can actually verticalize the relationship and then you capture the client. So I think that's probably would look into a payment account as a startup for bringing all the business.
Once they open the bank account, so with the revolving, are they competing with the banks and it becomes like a disadvantage for them?
So if they see, so let's again look at Nubank as a good example. Right? Nubank, before the bank, the issuing of the card, now because of the new rules, they can issue the cards provided they enter into an agreement with the MasterCard or Visa. When they have to do revolving, because they are payment institutions, they cannot lend the money. So they need a bank. So usually they partner up with a bank, which makes them in a disadvantage with the larger banks, because again, you have to share your fees, taxation, stuff like that. However, if they create their own SCD, which is that light financial institution, they can actually do the revolving themselves.
Yeah, but I understand that, but then they're going to be competing with banks that have probably better capability to offer better product than them. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting point, because first is cost of funding, right? So the SCD model, whereby they can lend money, in theory, if they put all their money, their own money, is going to be too expensive. However, if they create a fund and they attract Brazilian money and even foreign money, then their cost of funding is going to be very competitive vis-a-vis the big banks. The second is the banks, because of the way they were structured, the concentration of the banks, the lack of competition, they are certainly technologically good. Itaú experience is fantastic and everything else. However, they don't have the same technology that a Nubank would have, or they're not as fast as a Nubank Neon to offer experience. And what is happening, because of this, the age of the population, they would prefer to jump into a easy access, good experience with the client instead of staying in the big bank. And finally, people are a little bit fed up with the banks, because the business model of a bank is how long can I get my money back from this client? So, and whereby FinTech usually says it's a long-term run. So let's start getting nothing from the client, and eventually we will monetize this client in a future date. So this difference in business model creates some, so there is a bank, all the banks that created is like digital banks, and we've even joked, the first page is that, welcome, you have joined our digital bank. Choose your package of fees. Like, what? I don't want to pay fees. So there is a little bit of a changing culture that the banks are still learning, whereby the fintech company is saying, we don't want to charge you, come on board, I'll give you this great experience, and then one day we're going to offer you a... So I think at the end of the day, there is a mix of business model plus the experience, and this general disappointment of the banks. They're always trying to charge the fees, are not very transparent. So there is a big change in Brazil about that.
So just to clarify a question, you're talking about the SED and just raising a fund essentially. Where are those investors coming from? What is that, institutional capital?
Yep. So the FINTECHs, they can actually get the money locally from institutional investors or qualified investors, which mean a Brazilian that has more than $1 million reais invested, which is not a lot. But most importantly, you can attract foreign money. So we had a client called Geru, which is a platform that does P2P lending, and they decided actually to create, and they have a very good track record, and just for you to understand, they lend to classes A and B, and the interest rates are like 8% per month, multiply this by 12, so the returns are like fantastic. It's obviously if you take risk because but certainly these guys have great technology on credit algorithms, they spread your money into different loans, so in a way, so they pay very good money, much better than any kind of investment in the market. And what happened, one of the big investors for Geru was Morgan Stanley. And why? Well, they're buying in dollars. Yeah, they're bringing money in dollars. But even with the interest rate, the returns on interest rate, even if they buy a hedge, the returns are so big that it's going to pay the hedge costs, and it's still going to be one of the best investments for Morgan Stanley compared to any other investment they do in the US. With addition the fact, and tax is very important, that once they bring this money into this fund actually is a condominium. And so all the profit and losses are inside the fund are not taxed. And only when they decide to take their money out, they're going to pay 15%, 1.5 on the gains, which is very competitive from a general point of view. So what we start seeing at the office is companies like PIMCO, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, they are looking into these opportunities, and that makes these fintech companies with a lower cost of funding that can compete with the banks. So it's a kind of an interesting way how the fintech, although cannot offer deposit, they do access the market through the capital markets. So it's a different way. Obviously, the central bank does not want the mom and pop that has a savings account to take their money, invest in a fund like this, because it's a high risk fund. That's why they created this limit of $1 million reais minimum investment in the market, because they want people with more net worth instead of risking.
Since you have all these feature forms, are there companies like third-party companies like Paytm in India or Alipay, one of the 500 fintech startups?
In Brazil, you mean?
Yeah.
You have some of them, but it's interesting. The local companies are very fast and bullish, and so you don't see a lot of the foreign companies coming into Brazil. That's two reasons, I think. One is, I think they don't know Brazil as well. And second, I think the local fintechs are very good, I have to say. They have the advantage of knowing the market and having the backup of big funds investing in. And finally, there is this conception that if you become regulated by the central bank as a payment institution, there is unlimited liability if you fail. So irrespective of guilt or fault. So if you set your payment company or payment account and something happens, there's a huge failure in the system, and for some reason you go bankrupt, the owners of this fintech will have their assets frozen and be used to pay the obligations that the platform created in the market. So it says unlimited liability, which is a concept very Brazilian for banks, but very difficult for an American investor saying, we don't have that in the States. I don't want to take this risk. Now, how can you go bankrupt in a prepaid account? I don't know, because it really, it's not a credit, so it's kind of difficult to bankrupt a company, but conceptually, this is something that a lot of investors say, I don't feel comfortable doing that. So I think that's one of the reasons. But do we have Alipay? Yes, very shy. Do you have the Chinese money transfers? No. WeChat, we don't see. We have like a WeCash actually knows a little bit about. You don't see the Chinese investments on the payment. I don't know. Do you know why?
Yes, they're trying to serve the Chinese customers across the globe, and I think for Brazil, the Chinese population compared to the market is not as true, but could be.
Yeah. I want to add something. So I see that this year there are several Chinese companies looking at the Brazilian market and looking into creating payment systems for the Brazilian market. The Chinese always see Alipay and WeChat Pay in China and how that has been so successful, and they see, on the other hand, that Brazil has the potential to also have such a system, because there are a lot of gaps, what I explained today, which have to be closed. And there are companies looking at it at the moment, and investments happening, like Tencent that invested into Nubank goes a bit into that direction, and there are others also looking at the market. So I think we will see movements in the next quarters in this area.
I think there's also one fundamental technology question for the issue that people don't consider, that in China there was no ACH, there was no TED, there was no SEPA. So there were private payment networks that were set up, and Alipay and both WePay were able to access those private networks and essentially suck funds out of the market that was relatively impossible for another company to do. So if you go to Brazil and try to set up a P2P system, you necessarily have to go through a bank to get access to the intertransfer market. If you're setting up a Zelle, you necessarily have to go through ACH or create a consortium of banks. It was only this year that, because of the impact that Alipay and WePay have had on the banks, which essentially they're now competing with the banks enormously, that the Chinese government said, no more private networks, everything has to settle through a central system. But they had 10 years to suck funds out of the system and bring them into the wallets, and once they had the wallets, they could do credit, they could do P2P, they could do all these different things. So there's a technological reality that is very, very difficult to replicate, that probably could only begin to be replicated when you have faster payments in Europe, when you have faster payments in the US, when you have faster payments in India, that allows these fintechs to get funds into the market, first to get into the wallet, and then build on top of it.
Yeah, interesting you said that, because the P2P model, the transfer model in Brazil, and then discussing with the central bank, I said, we don't want the Chinese model. We don't want two guys concentrating everything. We want an agnostic system. So that's why we want to keep the liquidation, the central bank, and we will allow the different technologies through the switches. So they constantly have several switches that will, so they are very concerned in what you said, and they say they want, if you have a better technology and you grow because your technology is good, great, but will not allow someone to be in a private system whereby it sucks up the money. That's a very good point.
So the SEP is rolled out to you guys, the peer-to-peer. Then in a sense, it provides the same experience to the customer. You won't really need an Alipay. You know what I'm saying? Experience-wise, it's the exact same thing. The customer really doesn't care what it's called Alipay or CC. When you have SEP with that,
yeah, do you want to say?
Sure. Yeah, but the SEP is more for lending. So for P2P, you don't really need like an underlying purchase or a credit transaction. You can simply be money transfer. So
yeah, we're using the term P2P both ways, right? We're using P2P for lending and the P2P for transfer. So the P2P for lending, then you did the SCD or SCP. You're right.
Yeah. But personal transfer P2P, you have the instant when it's rolled out, right?
Right.
Transfer. It should be the same thing, right? It's like a Zelle equivalent. So you really don't need an Alipay.
It's true, but I think to the point, I think in Brazil as well, since 2001, because of inflation, they have created the SPB, which is a real-time transfer in few seconds using bank account to bank account. So as well, this has to do a lot with what you have available, right? So, you know, we work for Western Union. They say, hey, we have a system in the US, and this was like 10 years ago, that you can transfer money real-time. Like, okay, but in Brazil, we had that already. So, and again, it depends a little bit on what the infrastructure provides. And so in Brazil, the need for transfer money quickly with bank account, we never had it, because since 2001 they created this. Now when you have the payments account, we don't have that system, and that's why the demand is happening.
I'm actually curious, and like, because there is a lot of new entrants in the market, right? Do you think that there is a reduction in systemic risk for the Brazilian financial system because all the money is with the central bank, or it cannot be moved, or there is an increase in systemic risk because these are new entrants and the rules are not necessarily clear, or it's more or less the same?
I think for Payment accounts, because this rule says it's a bankruptcy remote, you keep the assets either in the central bank or it's reduction of systemic risk. So what they looked in the market and say all these billions of reais going to non-regulated companies like PayPal or PagSeguro. Again, PayPal is super safe, but also there's the very small companies. So when they created this rule, is to diminish this risk. On the other hand, when they learned a little bit about the credit card market, they also started to question what do a network guarantees? And remember that in Brazil, since you buy something the merchant receives in 30 days, they asked Visa, so do you guarantee that the money gets to Visa in 30 days, to the merchant in 30 days? They said, no, we only guarantee 5 days. So you don't guarantee anything? Well, no. Oh. So then we have a systemic risk here. So it's funny because when they started to regulate and understand the market, they also learned there are other systemic risks that were not in their radar. So the credit card business, the guarantees that the networks provide, which is it's a typical 5-day guarantee, doesn't cover Brazil. And it doesn't cover, for example, the installment payments. 70% of payments of credit card are installments. In theory, if an issuer fails on the first installment, the network doesn't guarantee the other 9 installments. So what is the size of this risk, right?
Or 12.
Or 12 installments. So that's something that is happening. Once the central bank regulated, they said, uh-oh, hold on a second, this is much bigger than we thought. So it's happening both ways. It's knowledge of increased risk and reducing risk.
No one knows. So, any questions, Ron?
Just changing a little bit the subject, I want to know, for the specific case of PagBrasil, and you can comment, if the FINTECHs are getting more interest from foreign investors, and if they are thinking on exits already, if you're thinking of an IPO in Brazil, if you think the market is ready for the type of companies, PagSeguro would be the IPO here, so your thoughts on this?
Yeah, a good question. We are a private company. We are profitable since almost we started, and we don't have any investors. So it's still ours, but we get a lot of calls. That's true, and also from investors here from what is called the Sand Hill Road, right? They also call us, and from other parts in the world, from New York as well. So there's a lot of. I would say from what we know. From our experience, there's a lot of interest from investors from the United States, particularly into Brazil. If we as a company, we don't look at the moment for. We would be open for like strategic investment, which would really take us onto the next level. We'd be interested in that, but we want to stay private as long as we can.
And we are not looking for an exit.
Nice.
Good point.
And Pinheiro, Neto can comment on this in general.
So very bullish market in Brazil. So we have actually a program in the firm that obviously we have the big clients, Nubank, Guia Bolso, Creditas. This guy pays our fees. But there is also a group of young guys that have great ideas, but they cannot afford a law firm and cannot deal with the tax regulations. So what we offer is a program whereby we give all the legal services. We keep our hours billing, but we don't charge. And once they raise funds on Series A, Series B IPO, we get a percentage to pay us back with hopefully with some premium, right? Because obviously we took the risk. And what we notice is the speed that these guys get funding is amazing. So we help Rebel Bank. Rebel Bank is a guy that created a B2P business. And in 6 months, Monaxis, which is a local fund, he already put like 10 million reais to start. And then just 6 months later, you got one of the 3G guys putting money, XP giving unlimited funding, and the company is already worth 50 million reais in 8 months. So what we see is that a huge interest in VCs and private equity putting money at the early stage, and the ramp up is super fast. So we got Biva, which is another P2P entity. They run for 1.5 years, and then PagSeguro bought the guys. 25-year-old guy got a huge amount of money. And so the truth is that there is a lot of liquidity available. And because of these fintechs, they are challenging the current model, and because they have all these opportunities that Ralph was saying, that there is excess of liquidity. It's amazing how it's easy to raise funds and how many people are willing to put the money.
Another question. It's a political question, but I'm looking for an apolitical answer.
Political soccer is too complicated things in Brazil.
If the army guy becomes the president and he's promised to destroy all the old systems, will the tax structure in Brazil become easier for companies to start?
So the one thing that the two candidates, the left or the right, and again, when you say left and right in Brazil, it's kind of relative. So it's not the same right and left you're thinking. It's very different. All of them are going to face the problem that the system has to go into a reform. The taxing system cannot continue as it is today. So all of them, the impression we have is that there will be changes and simplification in that taxing system. Both candidates, even the left-wing candidate. So what we hope and what we hear in the discussions is that the system will have to change. Also, and Flavio, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a decrease in taxation in the US, which then makes Brazil less interesting for investment and long-term investment. So now some of the speeches are, okay, we need to reduce the taxes and maybe tax dividends so that Brazilian companies become as competitive as an American company for purpose of investment, so we can redirect investments back to Brazil. So I think answering you, the trend is to simplify and probably reduction of cost of the business in Brazil. That's what we, right Flavio? Same. That's it? See, you always need a tax lawyer.
So actually, maybe I can put another question there. I noticed, like in just going to São Paulo, we actually, you know, with Margarese, we went to Nubank and we visited some of the companies there. And I have some friends that used to be at Itaú for many years, and those people are leaving Itaú, and they're like opening, there's like C6 Bank now, and all those things. And you guys did a great presentation. It's like, apparently the first stage of getting these customers is basically at a loss, right? Because you're acquiring them, probably spending in marketing, and then you don't make any money when the money is sitting there, and then you're kind of prepping for the next phase, right? So that there's probably, you know, the same amount of people that are being chased by different institutions. Is there a bubble in fintech in Brazil?
How long bubbles last? Because we have seen this for the last 5 years, right? And they continue to grow and appear and add opportunities. Obviously, to be honest, if you look at like acquiring business, you have 15 acquiring companies, you have 150 sub-acquire. Will all they survive? No, obviously. You have already 22 credit fintech companies. Will they survive? Probably, yeah. Why? Because the credit market is so wide and there is so lack of competition that is probably room for everyone. Will the payment companies that provide probably the best technology, yes, the others no. So it will depend. So I don't think it's a bubble. I think it's a little bit of excess of liquidity, that's for sure. So it's very easy to raise funds. But honestly, I don't see a bubble because there's so much room and so many opportunities that, right? Agree?
And the market's so much smaller than it could be.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. There's simply a need for solutions, and in the payment areas, in the banking areas, there's so much room for improvement and also for more competitiveness, because everything is so expensive in the banking and payment area in Brazil that I think as long as this is not fixed, there will be a lot of growth, and we cannot speak about a bubble, although some companies will disappear from the market for sure.
Question. So it means that somehow you can outsource cash management solution from banks to payment players like PagBrasil or other companies, or not? Don't you think that this is possible in the near future?
I don't think that we are a payment facilitator. We are in between the payment schemes and the banks or the infrastructure. And Brazil in this area, for example, coming back to the previous question, is also very much behind. There is still a mentality of merchants that I have to integrate directly with the acquirer, with the bank, and then they try it, but it's not good, and then they don't have the development resources to keep it always updated. And in other countries like the UK, for example, 80% of all e-commerce goes through payment facilitators like us, and in Brazil we are still far away from that. So, and coming back to your question, if we take business away from banks, I think banks globally lost. You know, they are too slow to. They lose this payment business completely. No? Banks don't do payment business because they are too slow. They're not innovative enough, and it takes them forever to adapt to certain things and to jump on certain trains. So. I don't think that we're taking away anything from banks. I think we're adding value to the system, and also for the banks, we are closing a gap that banks can't close. And the same thing on the side of the acquirers. Now, when we started in Brazil, the big acquirers, Rede and Cielo, they said, we don't want payment facilitators. We can do everything ourselves. We don't need these guys. This was how they thought. But now they understood that we're adding value. We're doing a lot of things they can't do because they're not fast enough, they're not flexible enough, they're too big, and we're adding value from them. Now they see, now we have acquirers, now they really want us to help them to improve their infrastructure through our platform. And they're even willing sometimes to pay for that. They see now the value. And I think this is on both sides that payment facilitators add value.
And Ralph didn't tell exactly the entire story about why I initially didn't accept the idea of creating a payment processor. Because in 2001, I tried that. And back then there was only VisaNet and Redecard, and I started for maybe 3-4 months, and then VisaNet said, no, you cannot do that, that is not allowed. And then, okay, so let me go back to my main business, the software business, and then I met him in 2009, and when I vented the idea for now Cielo about that, Cielo flew from São Paulo to Porto Alegre, and Cielo, the formerly of VisaNet, and asked us, please, can you connect to us to this new payment processor you are creating? So from 2001 to 2009, a completely different mindset for Cielo, only because of the competition to now Rede.
Like Alex, if I can go back to you, like you guys have like a high-level view of what's happening in e-commerce in Brazil, right? Through the transactions you process. Do you have a sense of like which segments are really growing faster? Is that something you can see from the merchants on your network?
Yeah, I think that there are statistics, there's research done on that, and I don't remember now exactly what the segments were that most grow. I think electronics was for long the most important segment, if I remember right. Apparel took over the last year or the last months, quarters. I think we see that all segments are growing. E-commerce overall is growing, and a lot of potential is in service. If it's consumer kind of products, in services which are provided online. This is a segment which probably has grown most in the past years, and yeah, cross-border also grew a lot. I don't know. Brazilians buy a lot in Brazil. Taxes on products are very, very expensive, and anything what you buy, I don't know, give any example, a projector which is imported from Japan or wherever it comes from China. Yeah, the new iPhone is 8,000 reals. So things are by far, far, far more expensive, like sometimes triple the price from what you would pay in the United States for a product. So what people do is, instead of buying it in the store next door, they buy the stuff directly from China, directly from imported, and even low. People, import individual phone covers from China into Brazil. It's a product that costs maybe, I don't know, $3, $4, and they import that directly from China. It's shipped directly from China. It also had a result that the Brazilian post had a big problem because the volume of parcels increased, and they couldn't handle it anymore, and their cost would raise, and they're also were not profitable. So they just from one day to another on the 27th of August said, from now on, we will charge 15 real for handling each imported package, for the customs clearance and all the handling they have with that. And you know, there were people who imported a phone case for 15 real, and now they had to pay another 15 real to the couriers, and so it was just doubled in the price. And it's not like that in Brazil, that they announce it and we will introduce it 1 year later as in other countries. No, they just do it from one day to the other, and then the market and the people have to live with it.
You mentioned the cross-border grew, but like to run up to the election, the currency devaluated quite a lot. Like how did the cross-border react to that?
No effect, nothing. People continued buying because you know, things became more expensive, but they were still cheaper than buying in Brazil, locally in the Brazilian market. So it was still worth it to import the stuff. And what yes had an important impact, it was the 15 real from the courier. We saw that this had an impact that low value items, the volume really decreased since August. But now people finding ways to solve this as well. Brazil, there's a lot of creativity. But we didn't see any negative impact from the devaluation of the real.
That's fascinating. I think I'm getting the subtle notice that, well, we're supposed to end, so and then we can keep going in the fantastic discussion. Thank you so much for this great presentation and the panel, and thank you the audience as well.
Thank you very much.